After hearing a more technical topic, I want to move with you now more to the human side of things. So maybe before we start, just quickly for the ones who do not know Adecco, we're the world's largest HR services provider. We're in 60 countries with around 167,000 specialists at the moment. So we have quite a bit of insight into the world of work. And what we currently see is something that already came up on the table that I was sitting at, but it's the paradox that we're living in as of today. And reality is we see a reduction of labor due to AI, especially in supporting and junior roles all across the globe. Now, the reality is as well that many of the early movers actually rolling this decision back. There are multiple companies that were really the early movers in saying, hey, we don't need to have IT support any longer. Let's get rid of the stuff that we have there. But they're actually currently going back to their employees asking for apologies, begging for them to come back. And Gary Marcus was saying to the Klarna effect, because Klarna was actually the first company where this happened. So I just grabbed his term because I think that this is a nice one. So this is really what we see as of today. That brings us to the big question: do we want to actually replace or empower people with AI? And here, this is really one of the topics that is driving us as an industry, as you can imagine, but this is a discussion that we have with so many of our clients as well. What is the direction that we're taking? So here, we really need to speak about automation versus empowerment. And I think one of the biggest discussions that all of us have in our companies at the moment is we want to focus on efficiency. How can we be more efficient? How can we reduce costs or increase actually our service portfolio due to AI? There's endless possibilities. Who of you were emotionally in a very loaded situation and got stuck in a customer service hotline with a bot? Please raise your hands. I think many of us had this experience, right? And while we all appreciate efficiency, on the other hand, we're risking alienation, right? So especially if we are in an emotional situation, if we need empathy or engagement that a human can bring, we really need to ensure that we can still bring that to our customers, and for us as our company, of course, to our employees and candidates, right? So here it's really about empowerment and not just about the cost reduction. So we want, of course, to leverage the potentials that we have in leveraging automation and leveraging AI where it makes sense, but maybe more in tasks that can be automated, like how can we improve data collection for payment? Secondly, of course, we also want then, with the efficiency gain that we have, empower our HR employees to actually focus on the things that are important, like the engagement, like the empathy. And lastly, the data insights that we can gather, and this is a big improvement, hopefully also in a good quality, that's a different topic, but that will help us to proactively address issues like employee burnout, like improved company culture. We are more able to detect that. So, in conclusion to that, AI should here empower and enhance the human connection, and obviously also enhance creativity, enhance human decision making, but not only cost cutting. That sounds like a fancy pitch, and now everybody's asking themselves, but how do we make that happen? It's not an easy task, but for us, one of the most important things is really the human-centric design angle here. And I know there's a lot of text on some of the slides, and I'll send them to you happily after, but human-centric design is really to place the human in the center of your process of creating these systems and running these systems, but from the beginning on, right? So this is really something that we need to do as the very first step, and that we need to do throughout the whole process of developing, but also maintaining our system. Why is all of this so important? So, and I think most of you might know, but I think it's very, very, very important to repeat that over and over again. AI systems are not the same as our static software system, right? Depending on the system, on the environment that we're placing them in, depending on the data that we're feeding into, these systems are changing their behavior. So it's very important that we're taking into account what is the environment that we're placing this in. And to bring you one example here that is something that is so often overlooked, but so important and dear to my heart, is all of these customer service chatbots that we're rolling out. Easy thing, right? It's LLM driven. The LLM will take care of the cultural adjustment that we need. Is the LLM aware that there are countries with a high context culture, so a very implicit way of stating things? Most likely not. Versus a low context culture. The US is more, in many parts, more a low context culture, which means the communication is still quite direct. Or take even Germany or Dutch, right? We're straight to the point, usually. That can be perceived very rude in some of the countries. We need to think about that. Then, second topic here, especially Gen AI systems are very sensitive to subtle nuances. If you phrase away a sentence in the right way first and then the other way around, slightly different, it will give you obviously a different answer. So also that makes the system naturally very, very sensitive for cultural nuances. And lastly, the AI literacy, let's be honest, overall is still not really given in society. That takes a couple of years to bring that into our cultures. So, human-centric design, we will go a bit more into that, but before we do that, I want to quickly give you an overview over how we are empowering all of that in the Adecco group. So it took us 2 years to develop more or less a governance approach for responsible AI, which is overall driven by our responsible AI principles. Our principles are to be ethical, human-centric, transparent, and safe. Underneath that, and to ensure that we're really acting on it, we have a responsible AI committee, which consists of different parts of our business, which consists of people from the different regions that we have, and which also consists, for example, of representatives of our Workers' Council, because we want to have these voices in there. Everything that the Responsible AI Committee drives and decides actually is executed via the Responsible AI Core Team, which is basically a team that is, on the one hand side, assessing all of the use cases from a global perspective, but that is also giving advice to the committee. And this Responsible AI Core Team is basically built out of tech, legal tech and AI ethics, security, data science, cloud, IT PMO, and enterprise architecture. And we're working very closely hand in hand then with IT and obviously with operations. And what we're also making sure is, and I don't know if you can see that in the back, apologies for that, but our approach here is also centered around AI ethics by design, and that goes hand in hand with human centricity. This is driving the user responsibility and empowerment. So if we're rolling out tools, on the first hand, we have local testers from the markets where the systems is rolled out before it is in place. And secondly, also here, everyone who's using the tool in the end is going through a training. Now, I know this is something that not everybody likes, but it's necessary. Then, of course, our tech teams need to be empowered with all of that. So here we really have design templates and checklists that are guiding their processes, but also, and we will come to that on the next slide, what is very important is that they understand their stakeholders and their users before they start designing and developing. Then we have the topic of continuous education. We're pushing out content for training and learning on a constant basis, but also here, what we do, especially with our responsible AI training, is this is based on the country and on the main roles that we have in our organization. So it's not one training for all, but it's actually one training per country and then per main stakeholder group. And lastly, governance and expert oversight. As I said, we have the Responsible AI Committee, but we also have an external committee that is advising the committee so that we're getting challenged and that we're not blind. So, what are the questions around human-centric design that we really need to ask? And I'm aware that this will be super small. I apologize for that. But the first question that we really need to ask is, who or which individuals are affected by our system? And here, who is affected directly? So in whose workflow is this embedded? And who is affected indirectly? Very important that we understand that. You can only calculate and understand your risks if you really know who is affected. Secondly, worldview impact. Is our solution something that can change the view of the person in relation to the field that they're working in or in relation to the processes that they're tackling? Third, change in relations. And this is for me also a very important one, especially if we're speaking about HR, if we're speaking about candidates and recruiters, for example, right? There can be a change in the relationship between those parties. If our candidates are engaging in the first step with a chatbot and have a bad experience with that, they will react quite differently to my recruiter that will call them afterwards, right? So we need to understand, is there a change in the relationship? Or also, is there a change in the relationship between colleagues that can be due to AI? It is important to understand those things. Accessibility, I think, should be a no-brainer, but it's always important to mention that again. We need to test those systems for accessibility. We need to understand what are the accessibility needs. Social conflict. And here we're going actually back to the topic from the beginning. Can our system create a social conflict? Is this something that influences, for example, the market dynamics? It is important to understand that for us, so we can make a conscious decision also, not only from the perspective of we need to do the right thing, but also from a reputational standpoint. Let's be frank here. Then technology adequacy. Also here, is the model the right one? Do we need to throw Gen AI everywhere? The answer is very easy from my perspective, no. Choose the right model for the right thing, please. And then basically also product or service failure. What happens if our systems fail? Mitigation strategies. What can we do against or to prevent those things? And that is basically what we need to plan for. It sounds like a lot, I know, but I promise you, once you get a routine in that, and for the ones who are not very familiar with design thinking, for example, as a methodology, there are wonderful courses that are for free from IBM, for example. They are very intuitive. Familiarize yourself with those. So we want to move with all of that beyond the good intentions. And Basically here, for me, the 3 core things is please build cross-functional teams. For example, in our case, HR, employee representatives, tech and ethics and legal. Engage with your employees. It will create more acceptance, but it also helps you to understand the risks better. Co-create AI guidelines, for example. And third, continuous monitoring. Really, I know also this is something that many people find cumbersome, but it's super important to understand how can we monitor these systems. So, in the end, what I want to leave you with for today is really that human-centered and ethical AI is not just a concept. It's a commitment. It takes a bit of reshaping of our processes, but we really can create with that AI that empowers, respects, and uplifts the workforce of tomorrow. And I think this is something that we all want to achieve and live for ourselves. Thank you very much.